Okay.
Mm.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see lots of familiar faces. I hope you're all keeping cool inside rather than outside if you're in Western Canada. Just a couple housekeeping things. Please keep yourselves muted. We will have question and answer periods in between each presentation. You can ask questions then, unmute yourself, ask questions then, or put some questions in the chat and I can read them out. And so I will start. First of all, we'd like to honor and acknowledge that we're on traditional lands of the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Stoney Nakoda, and Tsuut'ina, as well as the Cree, Sioux, and the Saulteaux bands of the Ojibwa peoples. We also honor and acknowledge that we are on the homelands of the Métis Nation within Region 3. We acknowledge all Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis who have made Southern Alberta their home. So, welcome again. This is in lieu of our artist reception. 2020, 2021 was kind of an awkward year for everyone, difficult year. We had to cancel our MIAIR solo shows last year, but this year we pushed through and we just opened them. They were not open to public viewing until just a couple weeks ago. And unfortunately, we're not allowed to do a reception yet. So we're going to do artist talks. And I don't know, most of you may not know, but we have not had a permanent curator at Medalta for about 5 years now. And every year what we've been doing is inviting a guest curator to work with our MIAIR artists to get their solo shows up. So this year we invited Carol Epp. And I don't really even know if Carol needs an introduction, but just in case. Carol is a Saskatoon artist known internationally for her art, teaching, and advocacy for the ceramics community. She's the editor of Musing About Mud. She co-founded Make and Do. She curates, she's a published author. She does a lot of things, too many things to note. So I think the best thing is to let her talk instead right now.
Thank you so much, Mariko. I'm not going to talk for too long, but I appreciate the opportunity to sort of say a couple words before all of the artists are speaking. This has been an incredible experience. The last 2 years, Medalta has brought me in to work as a curator with the groups. And I have to say, working as a curator, it's almost like I find it a very selfish, wonderful thing because I love art so much. And when you get to be a curator, you really get to invest in the artists and their work on a completely different level than you would in any other situation. So I'm not trying to show off or rub it in, but I mean, it's this process of working with artists for months at a time is really, really incredible in that I really get to find out so much more about the artists, about what they are personally bringing to their work, the stories behind it, their interest in the material, all of those things. And it really creates this beautiful understanding of the work. And I truly wish that everybody would have that opportunity of time to invest in all art. And we do get these opportunities to go and see work in person and stuff and have those separated times outside of life in a gallery space that are really beautiful moments to engage with art. And it's been so weird over the last year to not have that and to be cut off from that. And I just really want to champion all of these incredible female artists that worked with me through this process, because they also knew during this process that the work possibly wouldn't be seen by the public. And I think at having an artistic practice of my own, I understand how difficult that can be to motivate yourself with the work, because as artists, we make because we have something that we need to say and to get out into the world, but it really is about that communication with audience and that reciprocal relationship back and forth with an audience. And so as artists to work during a pandemic, knowing that people won't see or touch the objects that we're making, it's very difficult. And all of these women rose to this incredible challenge of persevering and pushing through with the work regardless of that. And I think that that's something that needs to be acknowledged and celebrated. And I really appreciate the opportunity to work with each and every one of them. Everybody brought their vulnerability to the table were incredibly inspiring with how they approach the material. You're going to see through their artist talks and through the works that they're presenting, really deep dives into 4 different perspectives about the world right now. Narratives that also have been, I feel like each artist's work has sort of been altered. It could have existed outside of COVID, but then it has this greater level of depth within this pandemic. And so it's almost like it's got all these extra layers added to it. But the works are incredible pieces. I really congratulate each artist for the success of these shows. I sadly have not seen them in person. Even living in Saskatoon, I haven't been out, and that has been it's been challenging. I met with the artists. We met on a weekly basis. We dealt with images. We did studio walkthroughs. I was in the gallery with them on the computer best I could during setup and stuff. We did the best that we could with that. And it was an interesting learning experience, I think, for each and every one of us as well. So it's definitely something that I would love to see this work in person. If you are anywhere near the gallery, I do hope that you have gone to see it in person. But still seeing things online, it does still give us a really great sense of the work. And there is something that in the last year, realizing that a lot of exhibitions are going online, it does open it up to a much broader experience for a lot of people who aren't geographically in the location. And so I think there's also a lot of positive with bringing things, even like an artist talk like this, online, and having it be accessible to a much larger scope of people to be able to be there, rather than just people who can drive over for the reception. But it does sort of suck that we can't raise a glass in person and pat each of these artists on the back and tell them how wonderful they are to their faces. So I do hope at the end of this and at the end of all of the Q&A that we do just take a moment to clap and cheer each and every one of them on for this incredible success. So each artist is going to go through and walk you through their process and a little bit about their shows. And so I'm really excited for them to do that. I don't want to say too much about their work because I don't want to sort of overshadow it with my opinions and what I've gotten out of their work. But each and every artist has really engaged with so much subject matter that I think is so crucial in a contemporary context. We're dealing with issues of identity, the personal versus the collective, feminism, the ideas of self-care during a pandemic, but also during life. All of these different things coming together in each of the artists' work are narratives that should be relevant to each and every one of us. And so I hope you just sit back and enjoy the next chunk of time with each and every one of these artists. And I know from my experience with them that they're incredibly open to questions and conversation about their work. I think most artists really do appreciate feedback and thoughts and opinions about what work they are presenting. So I do hope that you will all be generous as well with these artists and share with them your thoughts about their work. So, thank you all for letting me be a part of this. You're a great crew to work with, and I hope that our paths will cross again in the real world, and I'll get to work with each and every one of you again, because it's absolutely been a pleasure. Thank you, Narika, so much for organizing all of this and letting me be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Carol. I wish it was different, but it was still great nonetheless. So yeah, thank you so much. So up next is, up first, I guess, is Carmen. So Carmen is an interdisciplinary artist with a BA in performance from the University of the West of Scotland and a BFA in ceramics from AU Arts. So you'll see those two backgrounds heavily in her work. And she's also the mastermind behind the short video that we produced in October. So if you haven't checked that out, go check out our Medalta YouTube page as well. So Carmen, I'll pass it on to you.
Great. All right. Hi, everyone. Let's see. Show full screen. Perfect. Great. All right. And let's minimize this. Yeah. To the people on the internet, thank you for zooming in. So this is my presentation. My show is called Handle with Care, A Practice in Losing Control. All right. I'm an object maker and a prop builder, a project coordinator and a stage manager. My studio is a rehearsal space where I employ parameter setting and system making, informed by my background in theater. The work stems from personal experiences and is activated through research-based performative processes. I adapt recognizable rituals and imply material metaphors. My work delves into the psychological landscapes of mental illness by exploring repetitive and cyclical minutiae of the everyday. Handle with Care, A Practice in Losing Control is a multi-channel video installation, 2 sculptures, and audio in response to my residency at Medalta and living in Medicine Hat since September 2020. Over the course of the residency, my sense of time has felt both amplified and diminished. I found myself either in my small apartment, in the studio at Medalta, or at the grocery store, a feeling of agitated stasis. In the work, I explore themes of accumulation through multiple games of Sudoku, the deterioration of Jenga, and a never-ending pile of dishes. Additionally, I am examining the mixed messaging of the current hustle culture and self-care trend. The multi-channel video work will consist of 3 projectors on 3 adjacent walls. There are 2 sculptures that sit directly on the floor, and the audio just plays throughout the installation. So the first video is a grid of 9 Sudoku puzzles being played simultaneously. I filmed an earlier version of this sequence in my apartment during the first lockdown in March 2020. The beginning of the pandemic marked my return to video as I was unable to access my ceramics studio. The second video comprises 18 consecutive games of Jenga. The blocks are made of unfired clay, bone dry, and extremely fragile. The game gradually breaks down as the blocks deteriorate. The third video is a single shot of a growing stack of dishes as they are being washed. The projectors are synchronized and periodically share a shot of landscape surrounding Medalta and the IXL brick factory. So these are the 18 games of Jenga. And then there is also this list of words. So this is the jumping point for the sculpture listed as pile. The pile, not unlike a heap of dirty laundry, is made up of 81 words. Each word is shaped from coils of clay in cursive writing. They were fired in the kiln to varying shades of terracotta. And so here you can see in my sketchbook, it's just kind of a bit of a process shot. Some of my inspiration is on the right, some of the people that I've been looking at. And on the left-hand side, kind of the different components of the installation. So there's the video with the 3 main components, which is the Sudoku, Jenga, and dishes. And then in between those 3 main videos, there's these landscape shots that are the broken bridge, chair, field nap, floating plastic, dental tarp, train, tumbleweed, beehive kiln, IXL brick factory. And then the 2 sculptures, and then there's also the audio. So these are some of the video stills from the installation. So if you've been to Medalta, you might recognize some of these images. And the stack of dishes was filmed in my apartment that I share with JC, who you will be listening to soon. All right. And so for this project, I had some help from a couple of collaborators. Nick Gunhouse helped me with some video editing. And so I figured out how I wanted the video to look like, and I sent him this chart, and I said, can you help me? So I filmed all of the footage, and I sent all the footage to him, and he kind of sliced it up and made it this grid into what you see, if this grid makes sense to you. But so yeah, so it was nice to be able to kind of outsource some of the skills that I'm still working on. Likewise, I received some help for the audio, and I recorded all of the sounds with the Zoom recorder, and then I sent all of those sounds to a friend in Prince Edward Island, which is kind of nice because we have the internet, and Devin Ross, and he kind of made this beautiful soundscape sound design that I will be playing a little bit later. And then before the installation, so last year, I learned how to use Rhino, and I thought it would be a really good idea to do this mock-up of the moving walls in the gallery and to figure out how the projectors would look like on these moving walls. And I thought I was being really prepared, but as soon as the install week came, I found there were lots of problems to my plan, but we might touch on that later. So these are the 81 words that I made. They're very delicate. Several of them broke as I was trying to figure out what I wanted the pile to look like. I was hoping for it to look like a laundry pile and like nice and organic and fluffy, but it didn't work out that way because they're stiff, and so it kind of looks like a stack of raw hamburger, but I think it's still interesting. This is before the pile, by the way. All right, and then oh, I am just going to share the sound. Can you nod if you hear the sound? Perfect, thank you. So I'm just gonna let this play. So this is just, you may get a little bit seasick watching this. It's just some short clips of being in the installation. And the sound design is by Devin, but I'll just let you listen to it. I'm going to pause the music just after this part.
Play, pleasure, postpone, pretend, practice, purge, reset, begin, time, work, libido, desire, regret, reason, passion, maintenance, homesick, empty, concern, isolate, record.
All right. Yeah, that's thanks for listening. Yeah. That's what I got.
Great, thank you very much, Carmen. Are there any questions out there for Carmen?
Should I stop sharing my screen?
Yes, you can stop sharing your screen. Any comments, questions?
I do have a comment. Those words, I would not describe them when they are stacked together as looking anything like raw hamburger. I'm not making that connection completely, I would say. But I know you were saying you weren't really, I guess, content or happy with how the stacking of the words looked at the end of it. Like they didn't have the volume of this like fluffy pile of laundry that you were kind of hoping for. If you were to like install those words again, what would you do anything differently, or what would that kind of look like if you were to reinstall or remake those words?
Yeah, I think I would be a little bit less precious of making sure that the words didn't break. Yeah, I feel like it was really good to have JC. We spent a lot of time together, living together. Our studios are next to each other, and sometimes she would point some things out to me, and I would get a little bit frustrated. But like a day later, I'd realize that there was like, it made a lot of sense. But yeah, I was really precious about keeping the words intact because I wanted to show this craftsmanship. But yeah, I guess that isn't really the intent. It was to show this pile and losing control. And JC said, well, you didn't really lose control, did you? And it's like, ouch. So I think that's something to maybe explore. To not be so like, not to like deliberately like have them all, because I was worried that if they were all like, I didn't want it to look like alphabet soup. But yeah, if they were in smaller parts, I think it would be easier to not be this like, you know, hickory stick kind of thing. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, if I can make a comment about that, and I think I've mentioned it before too, but I actually really enjoyed how they are stacked very carefully like that, because I think that is our natural response to losing control, is wanting to keep it. And when I see it, I always, and I maybe it's because I've seen you working, and we've all talked about it too, but it's knowing that you wanted it to be separated in a pile, and yet it came out that way. I felt that was more meaningful for me, at least, because that's exactly how I would be stacking them carefully, being afraid, you know, afraid of what's going to happen when you lose control. So that showed through a lot more that way for me.
I have a question too.
You have a question too? Go ahead, Louise.
Well, I really enjoyed the juxtaposition of the four groups, because the blocks are
Louise, we're losing you.
and oh, sorry. Are you still losing me?
Yeah, we lost the actual question, so if you could just repeat that.
Okay.
You're
Well,
there
I was
now.
just, I hadn't actually put the question up yet. I was just going through the 4 categories of objects and that put together. They're a type of classification in their way. So I think I find that really interesting that the classification method is used because it's so diverse and so representative of our current world and our struggle to make sense of everything. So I thought that that was quite brilliant, whether it worked or not. You know, physically, I really enjoyed the ideas of the 4 of them being juxtaposed to one another, and the difficulty of, well, I guess we want to pattern recognize, you know, as humans. And so that's another aspect of it that is, I don't know, successful. Yeah, I'd say. So there really wasn't, am I on the right track even? I mean, did you have the idea of classification in the back of your mind? And
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, classification and list making and making connections in between.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was worried I was being a little bit too obvious, but I was thinking like, oh, the Jenga and the brick piles, and the dish pile, and the dish pile, and the word pile. But also thinking of like connections between people. JC and I, we live together, but we're 2 people. And JC bought 3 board games, like when we first moved in together from the thrift store, but you need 4 people to play the board games. So we haven't actually played those board games, and thinking about just like these different connections that we haven't had. And I feel like I'm always reaching to make connections with people in the weakest ways possible. And I don't know if it's my personality or a product of this period.
Well, I think that comes out really well in the fact that you chose these very different ideas and materials to juxtapose as part of the building process, or the list, or the, I don't know what to call it, the classification process, I guess. Yeah, no, I think it was very successful that way. And I got the idea, it made me think, I enjoyed that part, and where it was going, the pattern, and the instability of it all. That we're not looking at objects here, we're just trying to put some very fragile things together in a nebulous way, but it still works. So I appreciated that too. So there was no question. I just wanted to see, I guess, if I was on the right track in my appreciation of it.
Yes, you were.
Thanks, Louise. I think Noor, you had a question?
Sorry, just I had to unmute myself. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, hello, hi, all studio mates, and then my second home in Canada, in Alberta. I want to say one thing: the more I get involved and then understand Carmen as an artist, the more I find in her work emotion and also the reflection of the during pandemic, how much we were vulnerable, how much we were broken, how much we were actually ourselves, just relying on our realities. And then I think in your work, bringing out so many layers that I always have a, because English is maybe my second or third language, juxtaposition word. It's so difficult for me to use it. I think I find it this way, wholeness of life, that you are bringing page by page, surface by surface in front of us, indoor, outdoor, and how much we were fragile and broken everything. I think your work can be I already mentioned this to you, and I would appreciate that. It will be a perfect research for one of the academic level, because it's just a start, I believe. It's the first step. And then it has a great potentiality, and please don't leave it. I wanted to mention it that way. I found that strength, and then please embrace it and hold it and take it further. I would appreciate that, because these days are gonna be big archived, visceral and emotional days for the next generation. And I think you are in the right spot, this project. I would appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks, Noor.
Thank you, Noor, and thank you, Carmen, for that lovely presentation. I think we need to move on now to Yvonne. Are you ready? Yeah, so Yvonne Kustec, she's a Calgary artist. She majored in sculpture at ACAD, but she had a graphic design career. And so we're really glad that she's moved into ceramics, actually, as you will see here.
Yay. Thank you so much, Noriko. I'm just gonna start my presentation here. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Yvonne Kustec. It's gonna be a weird angle, so just bear with me for the next 10 minutes or so. I'm one of the 3 year-long artists in residence at Medalta in the Historic Clay District. Making work and maintaining a studio practice during a pandemic has been an interesting challenge. I've been really grateful for the space here at Medalta, as well as for the seclusion that living in Medicine Hat since September of 2020 has provided. So I'm here to talk about my exhibition, Serpents in Stone, A Woman on the Other Side. So at the beginning stage of this new work, I found myself at an intersection. I was feeling a strong connection to a familiar and comfortable way of working with clay while communicating ideas that were very personal to me. This was contrasted with an intense desire to step into completely new and unfamiliar visual territory that facilitated more research. These 2 photos are sort of snapshots of the beginning process. I started by working on multiple hand studies. I was interested in further defining my personal aesthetic in sculpting the figure. So I spent more time looking at my own hands and my own body to bring more realism and expression into the work. Here I found myself wanting to focus more on the curves and musculature and wrinkles on the skin and step away from covering the figure in flora, fauna, and fungi as in previous work. So the next stage involved hand and forearm studies. I was interested in how the pieces could interact with each other when placed together. There wasn't a lot of gesture to the hands themselves because I wanted to sort of build a story in the space in between and then further that later with glazing. But hilariously, I feel that I was obsessed with adding on these very dated and stylized Lee press-on nails to the hands, which I ended up breaking the majority of in the end, but decided to roll with it. Okay, so here I'm experimenting with transplanting glaze that was used on snakes made for a recent exhibition onto the hands. I was interested to see the effects of combining the snake texture with flesh. The snakeskin texture enabled more movement in this piece. The fingers were transformed into snakes when that wasn't a conscious choice to sculpt them in that way in the first place. So here I find that I'm building a deeper connection to the narrative potential within glaze, which was new territory for me. So Medusa seemed like a natural and obvious choice as a muse for this new direction and body of work. Art history is ripe with classical depictions of her as the Gorgon, the snake-haired monster interpreted by the masters of painting and of sculpture. Most often, she is a floating head freshly removed from her body by the hero in the story, Perseus. And these are 2 sort of classic examples by Caravaggio and Peter Paul Rubens. So we do find her body in this famous sculpture by Cellini entitled Perseus with the Head of Medusa. In this moment, he stands triumphantly over the body of Medusa, holding her head high above, a prize and symbol of his dominance over her. However, Bernini's depiction of Medusa, a bust in marble, shows an unusual take on her, of the eye seam filled with emotion, but yet still another example of a woman reduced to being a floating head and not a whole human. Okay, and here I started off my research in the podcast world, just openly and honestly. I found reading incredibly difficult since the beginning of the pandemic. I stumbled upon Let's Talk About Myths, Baby, an All Things Mythology podcast by Liv Albert. My intro was her discussion with author and PhD scholar Onwin Kaya Hayward. The unexpected twist revolved around their shared experiences with fellow male mythology scholars, consistently challenging their knowledge and expertise in their field of study. So here's, Onwin wrote a beautiful short story entitled The World Entire, a fictional story of Medusa told from her perspective. A short excerpt. The living wait outside, and I am within and without. I hold death's glare in my gaze, and I am powerless. There is a periphery between seeing and being seen, which I dare not cross. To behold is to be held, and my hands are empty. For fear of being seen, I have never looked. Okay, so fun fact number one, I was introduced to raku for the first time. It's a new firing process for me by a fellow studio mate at Medalta. Raku is an atmospheric firing fueled by propane. It's a rapid firing process, which is very scary for me and was very scary for me initially, in which you bring the temperature up in the kiln quickly. You then remove the pieces and put them into a container with various combustible materials like paper, straw, and grass. And then you seal it and let the reduction process that happens inside work its magic with the glaze. Okay, fun fact number two, in connection to the raku firing was the introduction to a new clay body. This is a high fire dark clay body, which was a big deal for me. My steadfast comfort zone is in a mid-fire porcelain-esque plastic and smooth kind of working clay. So this seemed like a big shift to play around with new clay, along with learning a new firing process. So I was completely enamored with the process and results of raku. The wild range of tones in the metallic finish really astounded me. This is one glaze and was 1,000+ possibilities. So my lack of understanding of the science behind what I'm doing can be a blessing because I work without expectation and always allowing space for the unexpected without guiding the process. I find so much freedom in not knowing what I'm doing or what's happening inside of the kiln. So continuing to play around with the narrative possibilities within glaze as surface texture. I was doing more experiments with replicating snakeskin. I was interested in the idea of glaze as a second skin. So in my experiments, I found more texture and movement as it was applied more thickly on the clay. And I'm making more connections to how I wanted to express and reference the monstrous side of the Medusa mythology through layering these glazes on the surface of the figure. This piece is entitled Seen Unseen. I wanted a stripped down version of Medusa, no snakes, not a monster, but a woman consumed, made unrecognizable by the mythology created for her. It was a nod to Ovid's version of Medusa in his famous Metamorphosis. His interpretation of her mythology has her born human to a family of immortals. Her beauty so astounding, particularly her hair, that she was coveted by men and envied by women. So here are two close-up photos of the detail in the surface texture of the snakeskin glaze that covers her face. It was an interesting space to work in for me, to spend so much time caring for the detail in her face to only cover it completely with glaze. I was thinking a lot about woman as monster conceptually, as well as connecting to that theme personally, how easily a woman can be transformed or manipulated into a metaphorical or figurative monster. This piece is entitled A Meaningful Gesture. I really want to acknowledge here the power in opening up to letting the clay have a voice throughout the process of making. I managed to break almost all of the nails while handling these hands, but instead of fixing them, I found layers of meaning in those breaks. So this to me felt like Medusa crawling her way to her own truth, reaching upwards for a moment of pause, a stinging final gesture to those that have contributed to any wrongdoings connected to her myth. This piece entitled The Punishment of Medusa. Here again, some sort of happy accidents bringing more meaning to the work. The snake twisting around the forearm is mimicked by the subtle bend of the wrist, leading to the outstretched hand covered in green snakeskin texture. The snake eye nails aren't easily seen by the viewer. They themselves have to slightly twist and bend in order to see that detail in the piece. In this piece entitled Myth, Monster, Mother, I wanted to remove all connection to the figure. A twisted pile of snakes represents the tangled mess of Medusa's mythology, in which she's characterized as many things, but rarely ever thought of as a woman. The hair from Ovid's version is the only remnant or connection to her humanity. How often women are reduced to roles or characterizations or stereotypes is represented through this piece as well. Okay, finally, now in Woman Unraveled, it was important for me to attempt to empower the most symbolic elements of Medusa's mythology without, again, a connection to the figure. The larger than life scale of this piece is an homage to the scale of the legend of Medusa. I wanted the viewer to really sit with this piece and take in all of its details. Her hair is such a powerful symbol and connection to the construct of a woman, and specifically to Medusa. I was interested in the dissection of and putting back together a strong and powerful woman who's been lost in the retelling of her own story. And so finally here we end up at a full shot of my exhibition in the Yuill Gallery at Medalta, Serpents in Stone, a Woman on the Other Side. Thanks everyone for listening to me. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Thank you, Yvonne. Any questions? I'm going to stop sharing this, okay?
Oh yeah, I can see here. I'll get rid of that. Okay, thank you. Oh, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Connie. It's okay if no one has any questions. Yeah.
I have a question. Oh, Nur, you have a question. Why don't you go?
You can start actually.
Okay. Okay, so I know the first time you were at Medalta, you made it a very, like the scale that you were working at was very huge. You had a show at the Esker Foundation, right? And it was like a full-sized female figure. I'm just wondering about like, because the scale of this work is smaller in many ways, but that the ring is like quite large. I'm wondering like what your kind of considerations of scale are now, having like worked at that scale and then kind of sized down a little bit, and if that if you see scale playing like a really large role in your future work in any regard, and how that might kind of shift and change. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I mean, the piece on the wall is quite large, but at the beginning of sort of the thought process of making this work, I sort of needed to step back on scale for a minute in terms of the figure, just that being such a labor intensive process to make a life-size body, which I will continue to explore in the future. But right now, the bust seemed like a great choice as sort of like a classical approach to sculpture. We see it quite often in historical figures. And then the hands, to be honest, sort of initially in my beginning of shifting into working with clay, hands were sort of where I started playing around with sculpting the figure. So it was partly a return to that, but those were based off of my hands. It was a life-size scale. I like working in that scale because it's such a personal connection to me in my own body and my own hands that are working with the clay. The bust itself is modeled after me. It ended up being a little bit larger than life size, but I like that sort of at that scale, she's a little bit more imposing than if I had made her smaller. In the past, in my exploration of the bust form, they started off smaller and then worked their way up. I find that naturally I just like to build on a larger scale. I guess just because of the close physical connection to my own body and like bodies in general. But moving forward, I know that I want the challenge again of working with a full-size figure. I just needed almost like a break from that for a minute because of sort of the troubleshooting technically in terms of making it. And my experience is still minimal, but fun to keep exploring and working at this scale.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I don't think it appears that your experience is minimal. So
Oh,
I don't think you need to worry about that.
okay, thank you.
Oh, there's a couple questions in the chat here.
Oh yeah, I have any.
Zoe is asking, do you have any plans to continue this series with other myths? I'm thinking of how other women in Greek and Roman mythology were depicted as traitors or as objects.
Absolutely. Even in my research with Medusa, there is sort of a long list of characters that I've written down that I've only sort of briefly explored, but I want to continue on this path because I really enjoyed sort of taking her mythology apart specifically, but recognizing the breadth of female characters connected to Greek and Roman mythology. There's so much to pull from. So moving forward, I'm going to continue to explore and opening up to other women in classic mythology. Absolutely.
I know Nur had a question. Sorry, I totally moved forward without you.
Yeah, I couldn't pass this because I need to ask this, Yvonne. This work is definitely, there's a Greek mythology, but I would like to connect, or maybe you can share your thoughts and then about what is the concept of connecting the mythology and the today's woman conditions and then bringing into your work in the physical environment as an installation we still experience. During the pandemic also, the woman body is still vulnerable. And
yeah.
I think there is a big connection, just a little bit, you can unfold maybe that part, because your work is very related. All this pain of woman body is the pain of having hair, pain of being described as a snake and snake body. It's just I wanted to come just that part. I didn't want to skip that part. It's very
Thank you, Nur. I appreciate that question. Just as a beginning snippet, it was interesting in the notes that I've been writing along the way. I had written this one thought down, just the idea of sort of the weaponizing of beauty in sort of historically and contemporarily. And so to go back first, just for a minute, to the Medusa mythology, this idea of this woman being so beautiful that, you know, she was coveted by men, but envied by women. And then, you know, in the story, she ends up being raped, but then punished by a woman in the end. So she's forever doomed to be this monster because of something that was completely out of her hands. And so this idea that beauty can be a weapon used against her by both men and women is still, I think, a contemporary thing that we're dealing with, but that isn't sort of the most important issue of this. It's the monsterization of women that happens so easily, connected to our own bodies, connected to vulnerability, connected to our own femininity, connected to personal expression, connected to sexuality and independence and identity. I think so easily those characteristics that are strengths or just related to your own personhood or identity can be turned against women so easily. And then you end up being made to be this other, this monster. And so that's reflected in the glaze, sort of having this barrier in between the skin and the viewer. So it's maybe partly protective, but it's also what's happening outside when people are pulling these pinpoints instead of seeing the humanity. Then she's slowly almost transformed into this creature because of sort of these stereotypes or ideals that are dissected and pulled from the actual person who is no longer seen. The woman is no longer seen or recognized, specifically in this work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nara.
Thank you, Yvonne. Oh, there's one last question from Melanie. So, similar to Zoe's, actually. Is there any other monsters you're interested in exploring in regards to women's roles in society? And then after that one, we'll move on. Yeah.
Basically, almost every female monster character in mythology is going to be something that I'm going to work through, I would say, over the next couple of years in my studio. So I don't have any specific ones that come to mind. I do like Athena specifically as sort of a different note in terms of this complicated relationship that she has with mortals. Arachnid is someone I definitely want to look at. She's also personally affected by Athena through a contest and turned into a spider. So I sort of want to touch on the relationships between Athena and human and mortal women, as well as the other women in the history of mythology. There's lots to pull from and be inspired by.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Julie-Claude. Julie-Claude is a Montreal-based artist. We don't have enough Quebec artists coming to Medalta, so hopefully in the future we'll have more. She graduated from Concordia in 2020, and she was actually a student intern in 2019, I think. So she's here, this is her second time back in a way, and we're glad to have her. So if you wanted to start your presentation, Julie.
I'm gonna start with unmuting myself and share my screen. Share. Great. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Nice. Did it. Great. So, well, thank you for the introduction. So my name is Julie-Claude Vezeau-Croteau, and today I'm going to talk to you about les Bernaches en froid, which means the Canada geese are cold. I didn't really felt like having the word Canada in my title, so I just wanted the geese part, and the geese isn't very precise in the English form, but it's more precise in the Francophone form. So that's why I choose the word Bernache, and I choose to have a Francophone title. Which, how do we? Aha! So a bit about me. So I'm an interdisciplinary artist born and raised in Montreal. My artistic practice is articulate about the narrative potential of daily life objects. And I believe that our quotidian objects reflect our taste, our desire, our culture, our value. And I believe that taking the time to understand those is a way to understand ourselves. I express my idea through installation, collage, ceramic, performance, and fiber art sometimes too. So this exhibition was inspired by my time in Medicine Hat. So I bike or walk to work every day, and it's made me pay close attention to the environment around me, and it slowly started to inspire me. Something that I thought was striking was how the animals that were activating the space that was around me. For example, the geese started coming in September and started just like with a few, and it slowly started to accumulate. And soon they would just be all along the river, just honking and honking. And I was like, oh, it's just going to be for a couple of weeks. That's great. And they just decided to stay. And I kind of like started to develop a feeling of empathy. And it was starting to, to be like colder and colder. And at some point it was -40. And they were just all around a little hole in the river that is like a large pond, really. And for them, the water was really warm, right? Because the water, when it's not frozen, it's actually it's actually +4. So I kind of like enjoy how that water was giving them a sense of comfort, but it was kind of like that really surrealist scene that they didn't migrate. And it's kind of like made me think of also like in some way reflect my own situation of just like also deciding to stay in Canada this year too, like just staying and the feeling of isolation and kind of like, I don't know, I felt a lot of empathy for these geese. And there was also like other animals that were in Medicine Hat. It's kind of like if the animals were not taking over, but really just being there. There was deers. There's like, when you walk here, there's probably like 30 deers. And there was also magpies and rabbits and animals that we don't have magpies in Quebec. But we do have deers, but they're more discreet. Here in Medicine Hat, they're really just there. And it kind of like felt nice to have this sense of company somehow too. And there was also mice, but they were really shy. So sometimes I could see them around the path, or I can see like those little paw in the snow, or just see them sometimes really quickly in the studio and be like, hello and bye. So yeah. So, but that's all kind of like it. And when I entered the studio, I had a precise project in mind. So as I said earlier, I explored the narrative potential of the object of our daily life. And my artistic practice is really based on object, because I'm really interested in their narrative potential. So I choose a sock, an antler, an ointment, and a shoe to represent my stay in Medicine Hat. I found the antler. I found the antler in a friend basement. I found the shoe in the thrift store, and I was going to the thrift store a lot. Hard word to pronounce. And the police forêt was just something that I would lose a lot and refine a lot and just use a lot, because ceramic is really hard on the hand. And and the stock was actually found in the gallery space. And so I was interested in these objects because I believe that they reveal a lot about our individual and collective identity, to show us the way that we have lived, as well as the way that we're living, because of their history, of their shape, of their usage, of how they were made, and in which condition they were made, right? So yeah. So therefore, kind of, I believe that setting up new ways to encounter these objects also offered us an opportunity to reflect differently on ourselves. I was also interested in mixing the objects, the meaning of these objects together, and kind of was curious what would happen when you take an antler, mix it with the shoes, with polyphony, how would we read that object? And I did that quite literally. But when I did it, I kind of felt there was something missing, because I'm really interested in the narrative potential of the life object. And it wasn't really enough alive for me. And without knowing it, I just started making actually these animals in the studio just for fun, just reproducing the animals that I would just find in my walk. And at some point, they just insert themselves in my artistic practice without really me choosing to. It just happened. And I really felt like it was working. And I have a little anecdote. I remember seeing a talk by Guido Molinari in Montreal, and he was making those big stamp mural of stamps, and he had different stamps. There was some stamps that were used for words, and other stamps that were used as verb, like action. And I felt like my objects were more like words, and I felt like the animals were acting as verb, and actually making in some way making the object live and feel more alive for me. In parallel, I was also very interested in the relationship between ceramic and comic. So I started creating these tales that have mixed truths about how I acquire these objects, and kind of like making as if the animal itself I found this object, what it would do with it. So yeah, and so I pair each animal with one object: the magpie with the antler, the geese with the sock, the mouse with the shoe, and the rabbit with the ointment. Another difficult word to pronounce. So I kind of was really I was really fascinated by how the clay can also just mimic an object and kind of act like a trompe-l'œil. So when you see it, you're not really sure of what it is, but it still have the quality of the material that you made it. So this is actually like the comic that is screen printed on a piece of clay, and I kind of like enjoyed that sense of strength but fragility that they add to it, and also how the oxide have also kind of like this sensory feeling. And so yeah, and I was also interested in how glaze was starting to come into play and kind of like creating other feeling, right, with the original story, kind of like representing frost, and when the narrative started to feel lost. And in the shoes, actually, it is still the comic, but the glaze kind of like disformed it so much that we kind of don't see it anymore, and it becomes something else. It's something that I was like interesting by. So something that I really enjoyed too was the, you know, just like having access to the boneyard to create the exhibition. So it's kind of all some tools, some historic, you know, table that we have access to. And I really felt like it was kind of like bringing the outside space, and what also inspired me during my stay here to medicine hat. And also I started while I was just creating, just painting and yeah, just painting around the wall and playing with the way that you put these objects to make it more dynamic. Yeah, so here's is just like a rabbit. That is just how I take an image and just a repetition through the work. And I'm gonna skip fast because it's close to the end. And yeah, and that is just something, a little story about the MIAIR, that they actually mourn when there's a MIAIR dyer passed away, they mourn. And I thought it was, I saw a video of it, and there's so many here. And I kind of also just kind of like did a homage to that, and especially with the pandemic context that we have a lot of loss and sadness. Yeah, and it's just the deconstruction of a shoe, and I'm just skipping through because it's the end. Yeah, just the light. Yeah, just how the light was also kind of like, if you go to the gallery, it's always a bit different because how the light touch the object and change the way that we see it. And I just wanted to say thanks to like a lot of people, because a lot of people helped me make this exhibition happen, of like just like technical issue or like just support really. So there we go. Yay. That's sharing.
Thank you, Julie. Are there any questions for anyone? Everyone's shy, I think. No one? Julie, what are your plans from here on out then?
I am going back. I'm going back to Quebec to live in Montreal for a year, and after that, I'm thinking of applying to grad school. So, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, j'ai une question. I have a question. Est-ce que dans vos travaux avant ceci, les animaux ont jamais eu un rôle aussi significant, important, ou est-ce que c'est dû à l'environnement surtout? Le fait qu'il y a des animaux qui jouent avec les objets inanimés.
Right. I'm gonna answer in English just for
Okay.
people to know, but I really appreciate for
I
like,
thought you should get a little
I've asked this
French
question
in
in
there.
French. I was like, oh, that's so nice. I just want people to understand too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but before I never use animal in my work. What I did before is that I used cartoons a lot. So I would use cartoons to actually create faces on objects. So that's how I animated them. But this time I didn't feel the necessity of putting faces on the object themselves. But doing that, they were not animated, and that's how the animals kind of like went into play, but I never really did that before. So it was, but it's definitely something that I want to continue to explore. I'm interested.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
JC, I have a question. I was wondering, this body of work felt so specific to Medicine Hat and your experiences here and what it was like living here. Do you feel like that kind of responsiveness to your current like living situation and city, do you think that's going to be a trend that will kind of continue in your work, or do you feel like was that something that was just so pertinent to this specific time in your life?
Yeah, it does make sense. I feel like time will tell, actually. I feel like when I was in Montreal, because I lived there my whole life, I didn't feel like it was a sense of change. So how could it was actually all my work is informed by where I'm from, right? But in a way, where we're from kind of like became this sense of normality, which is not normal for everyone. And moving here, it kind of like make me take a step back and say, oh, okay, that's my new daily life. And I kind of like had kind of like that fresh eyes to just and be also open to the events that were happening around me. So just and the events were just like the geese being closer, like small stuff, but fun stuff.
Yeah, Medicine Hat is very special in that way, just all of the wildlife here. And even though I've been here for 2 years, I'm still obsessed with the gophers here. Like, they're still so entertaining to me and so strange. But...
yeah, and also I feel it's just, being here, if I would have started the residency maybe like in June, maybe the gopher would have been in the show, right? But they were sleeping, hibernating during the winter, so they're not there. But yeah.
Next time.
Okay, thank you, Julie-Claude. Up next is Amy Duval. She isn't a year-long artist. She's actually one of our permanent resident artists. She is from North Vancouver. She received her BFA from Kwantlen Polytechnic University in 2017. And the first time she was at Medalta was in 2016 as a student award resident. So yeah, I'm really glad to have her here as our studio technician as well as permanent resident.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you all, and hopefully you can see me. All right. Okay. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Noriko. My name's Amy Duval. I'm a visual artist, born and raised in North Vancouver, British Columbia. I graduated from Kwantlen Polytechnic University in 2017, which was a small interdisciplinary fine arts program located in Surrey, British Columbia. Upon graduating, I spent 2 years in Toronto at the Harbourfront Centre Artist in Residence program. And in 2019, I moved to Medicine Hat, Alberta. I always say I moved to Medalta, but I moved to Medicine Hat. I didn't move into Medalta. I guess I kind of did, but I don't live in Medalta. And I've been here ever since. So in my BFA, I spent a lot of time in various scrapyards doing research for my open studio coursework. Here I kind of encountered an auto body scrapyard, and I was really interested in how these vehicles seem to be frozen in a specific moment of time. They were filled with paradoxes. So they were these large metal structures that were once powerful, forceful objects, but now they existed in a space that was much more fragile and vulnerable. This space kind of humanized them in the sense that their bodies also kind of fell apart. Oh, sorry, my transitions are being a little strange. In my undergrad, I started slip casting these mechanical objects that I sourced through scrapyards. I started attaching them together to create new hybridized objects and played with arranging them in proximity to one another. My first love in art school was painting and drawing, and here I kind of tried to merge my love for drawing and painting with ceramics. I started looking at ceramics as being a form of three-dimensional drawing, and this led to me mounting my work directly on the wall. I would combine the ceramic aspect of my work with layered drawings, playing with different visual representations of an organized sense of chaos and complexity. Often I would draw on the wall with colored slips. It is very much a process of adding and subtracting with water, working quickly and gesturally in reference to mechanical diagrams from various instruction manuals for different machines and pieces of equipment that I found interesting. I'm merging wheel-thrown forms with slip-cast objects, cutting and carving into the clay to create forms that reference mechanical objects, but were ultimately not functional, much like the gutted vehicles in the scrapyard. My drawings were very inky, gestural, and they acted as a contrast to the tightness of my ceramic forms. So much like JC spent time in the boneyard here, as all of us have, I also very much love the boneyard here at Medalta. It's kind of a site where a lot of the historic equipment from when Medalta was a functioning pottery is kind of left outside. This is very much a site of research for me. So here I do a lot of photo documentation and drawing in preparation for making models for my slip casting molds. So these models that I make, I often use the plaster lathe to make them. They're made in reference to a lot of the artifacts that I've been researching in the boneyard, but they're not direct replicas of them. So working in the studios at Medalta has really allowed me to broaden the processes that I use in my personal practice. The plaster lathe is a tool for me that allows me to push the forms I later slip cast into a more ambiguous, abstracted territory. So on the plaster lathe, a solid piece of plaster is spun horizontally and then carved out with a variety of chisels. So my work happens, much like everything else in ceramics, in a few different stages. I slip cast a large volume of work, filling up damp boxes that I store them in, which kind of keeps them nice and soft and wet and easy to work with. I then throw forms on the wheels to kind of act as like the body or the centerpiece of my sculptures. And then I use the slip cast components attached to the outsides of these forms, kind of like as limbs. And I build directly on kiln shelves because these forms are very vulnerable and I tend to break things a lot. So the less I have to move them, the better. This is an installation shot of the show Bloom and Burst in the Yuill Family Gallery at Medalta. So here I'm shifting around a little bit with the drawing aspect of my work by using large sheets of painted MDF cut in various shapes. I use paper templates to mock up the composition of these pieces on the wall, and then I mounted them. Here I'm trying to define a more practical approach to installing my work, and it kind of allowed me to introduce a bit more geometry and kind of like solidity to my compositions. So this is an installation shot of the taping and the drawing process that I usually start off with. I get my MDF up, the tape goes up, I do a gestural inky clay drawing that spans across the 4 walls that I was given to work with in the studio space. The tape is peeled off, and the negative space left behind by the tape is then painted, which I used a lime green for this. So this process is very much a push and pull between working fast and slow. The pacing changes consistently between slow and fast. The interruption of the drawing by the MDF I found a little bit jarring and is something I'm reconsidering for future projects. It really impeded the like full body motion that I would typically use in my drawing practice, and was actually something that I found very important to me because it is so different from working in such a tight, controlled way with the clay. So the drawing aspect was so much more of a physical, gestural kind of motion that I actually took a lot of comfort in, and the MDF very much interrupted that, which was quite rude. So this is the largest section of this 4-wall installation. So the MDF is the deep blue gray shapes painted. I'm using a lime green acrylic line to lead the eye around the composition. I'm using black pastel, white and black flip, water, sponges, my hands to subtract and smear the material across the wall. I was using plain thin M370 casting slip and clay and paper clay used to make the wheel throne forms. And the red earthenware clay body is Plainsman's L215, also a paper clay that I mixed. And I use these, I built them on top of a piece of paper that I drew an outline on that was referencing a bunch of the forms that I researched in the boneyard here at Medalta. And then I just bent these coils into the shape of these drawings. So kind of using the drawings as a template. So the title of the show is Bloom and Burst. So I'm thinking a lot about energy, expansion, a concentrated area of intensity that slowly dilutes when it's spread across a wall. I'm thinking about the term bloom as a moment of intense beauty and potential, kind of opening up to the world, but also a moment that's ultimately brief. I use the MDF to carry the composition from one wall to the next, as well as the drawings. The largest wall here is kind of where I consider the piece to kind of originate from. The other walls are increasingly far apart, and the objects are scattered further and further as they reach the outsides of the composition. Much kind of like in a burst or an explosion, you have an area of concentration and everything scatters and distances itself further the further it spreads out. So in this body of work, I really moved away from glazing my ceramics. I ultimately decided on white to try and give the eye a little bit of a place to rest, which maybe is a little ironic considering the chaotic nature of my work. But also there's a lot of natural light in this space. This really allowed the light to kind of create shadows and bounce off the surface of the work, depending on how the light kind of shifted throughout the day. The solid green line in my work is really composed in reference to some of the mechanical instruction manuals I've still been looking at. I'm really thinking of this work as kind of an exploded diagram of a piece of machinery, and the line is going to direct you from one component to the next. The layers of transparency and the drawing aspect of my practice has been something that I feel really acts in contrast to the solidity of the ceramics in the wall. And kind of I guess speaks more to my interest in painting and layering and transparency and playing around with different levels of opaqueness. So I really thought of my ceramics as a form of three-dimensional painting, and I still do feel quite connected to that idea. Paintings mimic space, but sculptures exist in physical space. And here in this body of work, I'm trying really hard to kind of redefine this relationship more and kind of understand it a little bit better. So ultimately, I see my work as an attempt at creating metaphors for the simultaneously beautiful and messy nature of the human experience. I really want to leave the viewer with a sense of hope that can kind of burst forth from the chaos of destruction. And I often imagine a marriage between the two seemingly oppositional ideas in my work, so the mechanic and the organic. And I wonder a lot about what the forms and structures would emerge from combining these two opposing ideas, or seemingly oppositional ideas. So despite the perceived futility and trauma of destruction, I feel that my work is meant to contain energy and hope for new forms and systems and structures that can come into bloom in the aftermath. I'm really interested in the idea of the diagram as a mode for understanding the world. The ceramic objects in my compositions are placed in specific proximity to one another to create new relationships. I find that their limbs are all reaching out to try and touch one another all the time, and yet because they're frozen, they will never actually touch one another. These diagrams are a collection of paradoxes, chaotic and organized, systematic and organic, much like our own lives, I think. And my work, I feel like, is filled with references to the history of these objects that I'm referring to. The kind of vulnerability in allowing ourselves to imagine a future where they can grow and merge together to create new territory and meanings. So in this final image, I kind of look at it not just like not as the end of a sentence per se, but more of a punctuation mark, a pause that's loaded with the potential for what could happen next. And that is my work currently in the Yuill Family Gallery until July 3rd, entitled Bloom and Burst. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Freddie has a question. Does the nature of your drawing process make it temporary?
Yes, it very much does. So that's something also kind of why I brought the MDF material into my practice just recently, is because I've had a really hard time installing or submitting work to shows that I couldn't physically be present at for the installation. So my thinking of like with the MDF, like I'm kind of almost constructing a painting that I could potentially send to a gallery. They can hang up and then put my work on top of it for me. And I can give them a whole set of like schematics of how it all kind of plays out. But my drawing has always been very, very temporary, especially in school. Like all of my graduate work no longer exists anymore in that space because the space I drew in was torn down shortly after I graduated. And everywhere else, my drawings get washed off of the walls as well. So it has always been very temporary. And I think that's been something that I've struggled with a lot, but has actually shifted quite a bit since being at Medalta because I have so much more wall space here. I can sketch directly on the wall and then I can revisit that drawing, which is something that I didn't really get much of a chance to do too often in the past. So that's been something very exciting for me to have a little bit of time to sit with what I've done. Yeah.
But you did mention that the MDF, I think you said you really struggled with that way a lot, right?
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts on how you are going to go forwards with that, or is it?
Yeah, I still am really stuck with that because I feel like the part of my drawing that I enjoy so much is just getting to use my whole body and to stretch from one drawing surface to another. So I found like going from like the raised surface of the MDF directly onto the wall just interrupted that natural like movement very much. And I really, for me at least, like I like drawings that kind of span across all sorts of different surfaces, and I don't want it to just be a piece of MDF on the wall with a drawing on it and then a ceramic piece on top, because then I feel like it really reads so much more like a painting, and I don't want to be confined, I guess, by the boundaries of like a canvas or a frame. So that is something I am struggling with, and I have not reached a resolution. But I am still playing with it a little bit. But yeah, to be honest, I have not quite gotten to the point where I feel confident about continuing on with MDF or any sort of other mounting method in that kind of regard.
Melanie says, I sort of love the idea that you have to be there for the work to exist. So, you know, that speaking to the temporary nature of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do like that too. And I feel like it is very hard to give up that kind of control too when it comes to installation as well. So, I mean, it is an idea that I have. I don't know how it will play out in the future to have my work shown in places where I can actually be there to install. But yeah, I guess my thinking in that regard is I'm trying to open up so that I can make it easier to potentially do that. But I don't know if it's actually going to feel right for me if that ends up happening.
I did see the show, and I didn't notice you talk of the MDF as an interruption, but from my perspective, there's so much going on in that major wall and it was very fluid and full of incredible detail, that I didn't see it as a viewer as something that stopped me, but something that worked well between the flatness of the wall, the MDF, and then the various sculptural pieces. I felt that worked really well together. So I hope you find the solution that you're looking for, but I didn't, it wasn't a problem as a viewer to me.
Good.
Anyway, yeah.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. I feel like
You're
it's
welcome.
always so much one of the thought processes, I guess, for the artist, where it's just like, you struggled so much doing something,
Right.
but the viewer's just like, I didn't see that at all. I don't know what you're talking about. But so I'm glad that my struggles were not too obvious.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment again. Hey, friends.
Hi. Miss you too.
I just on like the installation thing, because like as an installation artist myself, it's like something that I've had to think about a lot. And it's one of those things where it's like, do installation works need to be able to travel well? Like I sometimes wonder if that's like the baggage that comes along with working in ceramics or in traditional art practice. But it's something I've thought about a lot myself in my practice, and like sometimes letting that go, writing it into the grant that you do have to be there to install this work, and like allowing for that. I just think it's something there, like they can't paint that, like if you were to send that to how they were to paint it, even if they had all of the right colors, all of the instructions and images to go off of it, still wouldn't be painting, it wouldn't be your work. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I thought about that a lot too, because I've also played with the ideas of like, getting my drawings printed in vinyl form so I could send that off too. But I think for me, it is such a huge shift away from like what is important to me with the drawing aspect of my work, like, and especially if I can draw with slip on the wall, that speaks to me more conceptually as well. And that's not, you're right, like that's not something, like there's a ton of amazingly talented like gallery like preparators out there, but that's not something that they can do for me. That's something I have to do for my own work, and that's something I don't think I could really let go of. But it is interesting, like what you're saying about like the baggage that comes with ceramics, of having it be like, oh, if you could just put it in a little box and then send it off somewhere, and that would be so nice and neat and tidy. But it's really like, the more I try and make that happen, the more I'm like, this does not relate to my work at all. I don't think this is a thing for the way I work. But it is interesting because it's hard to kind of step away from that idea a little bit, or maybe redefine it, I guess, in a way that's actually more related to the way, or realistic to the way that I work. Yeah.
Interesting experiment to have an Amy Duval installation arrive to somebody and let them attempt it. See how you feel about it.
Yeah. Well, it did happen once before, and I was like, oh, this did not go as I had hoped at all. So yeah, definitely there's a lot I'm thinking about in that regard. That's probably not a great answer to that question, but I'm like, there's so many ideas and I don't know what the answer is just yet, I guess is what I'm saying.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else from anyone about any of the artists or shows, or? No? Nothing.
I just want to say hi, Mom and Dad.
Noriko, I have a quick question since I hopped on a little late. I know it's recording. Where will this be posted later for?
I don't know. I will figure that out. Probably,
Okay.
I'll have to talk to Jessica about that one. Probably our YouTube, I would pay, or whatever you call it, I would think. But yeah, I will let you all know.
Because I would like to see Carmen's talk.
Yes, and also if you haven't already, I'm just gonna put this up here. Do go check out the virtual tours. I know they're not the same as actually experiencing experiencing the real thing, but it still is. I think it still is really important to go see it, and you do feel, yeah, I think you still do feel some of the things you do feel when you're in there for real. So it's definitely worth watching. So yeah, and just big applause for everyone. This was, I know it was so hard for all of you, for the 4 of you, and for Carol. Like, for me, it was just the weirdest way of installing shows, and but you all did it, and I'm very proud of everyone. And there's still a few days left, so if you can make it out to Medicine Hat, or if you're in Medicine Hat, please do check out the real thing. Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to say?
I'm very proud of everyone also. I think that was really what Carol was saying at the beginning of the motivation aspect, I think, of making work in a time like this is especially challenging. But at least for me, it really reaffirmed the idea that, like, I make art for myself. Like, I want people to see it. I want to have that relationship with the viewer, but ultimately, like, I make because it's an internal impulse in myself. And I think that was really interesting to really realize. So that's the end of that for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, we still have a few minutes left, so if anyone wants to say anything else, but there's lots of congratulations to everyone, which is, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's too bad we didn't get like wine glasses or champagne ready or anything. Sorry about that. But yeah. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. I know it was, I don't know, I have to admit, Zoom meetings are always very tiring, but also I think this was a really valuable one to join and to do. And yeah, thank you so much everyone for being here. And it's really nice, actually, I see a lot of alumni, and I'm assuming a lot of family members of the artists who are here. So it's really nice to see that. So yeah, thank you everyone. Yeah, if there's nothing else, I think I might just end the meeting, but if anyone wants to say anything else quickly, do so.
I just want to say thank you, Noriko. You always work above and beyond, and so many amazing things together. And so I would like to just do an extra applause.
Oh, no.
Yay, Noriko!
Of all the incredible work that you do. So thank you, Noriko.
Oh, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carol. I think it's all for everyone, all the artists, right? So, and I know it's been tough. So, yeah, thank you so much for everything. And next year, hopefully, it won't be like this. We will be able to have a reception and yeah, be able to cry together in person instead of over the screen. So, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to end it now. So, okay.
Thank
bye.
you. Bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.